I'm going to read an alternate historical fantasy called Sarah Across America. It's the beginning of a novel. Chapter 1, Sarah in Philadelphia, starts with a time and place notation. It says, the province of Pennsylvania, July 1931. The award letter caught up with Sarah at her mother's house in Reading. With her committee's approval, she was taking the summer off, far from her carrel in the Adams Library. You see this? She had asked Professor Hollins, pointing to the ABD next to her name atop the last annotated bibliography she had completed. For the next 3 months, that's going to stand for anything besides dissertation. So instead of poring over inert redcoat-filled maps of Azteca incursions along the Gulf, she was working in her mother's bookshop and enjoying the quiet of Pennsylvania village life. Did you apply for another internship with the Royal Society? Her mother asked. She was coming in from the post office, holding a thick bundle of letters and catalogs. Sarah set the novel she was reading down on the counter. The little shop was uncharacteristically empty and characteristically tidy, so she didn't feel guilty about being caught reading. No, Sarah said. Have they sent me something? Her mother handed over the thick parchment letter. It had been addressed to her, Sarah January, care of her rooms at the library in Boston. Professor Hollins had scrawled the forwarding address below the frank of the Royal Society of Geographers, an engraved reproduction of the famous Randolph Peale painting of Jefferson with his great bull mastodon, Octavian. This is from their grants committee, Sarah said. I don't remember. She turned the letter over and slid her fingernail beneath the wax seal. The parchment unfolded into a single large sheet. It's an awards letter, Sarah told her mother. It must be for one of the grants I was looking for in the spring. How much is it? Her mother asked, worry and pride competing in her voice. Will you have to travel? Is it for your Florida project? Sarah scanned the closely lined letter. I don't understand. Her mother snatched the letter from her hand and read, for a project to recapture or reproduce the map conjured by Lord Governor Jefferson for the Lewis and Clark expedition. That certainly predates your period of study, dear. Why did you apply for this? Sarah took the letter back and shook her head. I didn't, she said. Just take the money, shouted Professor Hollins. He was shouting because of a poor connection, which was to be expected on a telephone call all the way to the Massachusetts colony. Sarah was seated in the wood-paneled phone booth in the lobby of the Royal Caledonian Hotel, which usually reserved use of their phone for guests. Her mother played bridge with the manager. I didn't apply for it, replied Sarah, holding the speaking horn close to her lips. I wanted funds to purchase equipment to revive Azteca maze maps. I don't know anything about Lewis and Clark. You don't have to, said Hollins. Look, the Society grants a half dozen of these Jeffersonian scholarships annually. They've been trying to regain that map for more than 100 years. Nobody ever uses the money for that, though, because nobody seriously expects the expedition map to ever be recovered. It's the El Dorado of cartography. These grants are just a way for the Royal Society to dole out the piles of money the railways and carters give them, questing after safe land routes to the Pacific. But I'm a technologist, said Sarah. The whole point of my work is to revive maps without having to traipse up and down the seaboard, digging through dead records. Sarah had heard her advisor's distracted sigh more than often enough to recognize it, even through the static and crackle that came in response. He said, it's £3,000, Sarah. Funding opportunities like that don't come along very often. You should at least go talk to the Society and get the lay of the land. Which only made sense, but Professor, with all due respect, I never know whether your version of the rules is the same as the actual rules, she said. A series of loud clicks came over the phone, signaling that the operator needed the line. Just before the connection went quiet, she heard him ask, what can it hurt to go find out? I didn't really think you were going to spend all summer sitting behind the counter reading Edna Ferber novels, her mother said. By all means, go find out if the committee has as laissez-faire an attitude as the professor claims. So Sarah found herself at Reading Station, waiting for the afternoon local to Philadelphia. She'd checked the schedule before she left her mother's house, but still examined the little map box on the platform out of long habit. Her curiosity was rewarded. The local transit authority had updated its map since the last time she rode this line. For as long as she could remember, the maps had been almost static, showing little more than arrivals and departures with tiny sepia illustrations moving along the track lines to indicate the positions of the trains. I must not be the only one who's received a grant lately, thought Sarah, because the window on the antique map box was barely sufficient to contain the area map it displayed. Full of color and motion, it showed an image of a train tinted in 3 or 4 different shades moving along the track, approaching Reading Station. In a touch that delighted her, Subtle and playful both, the blue line of the Schuylkill River showed movement as well, restless in its inked banks. It was a good map, meeting all of Sarah's standards for clarity and utility, and new enough to be free of the errors maps tended to introducing themselves away from the eyes of their makers. The scale of the map suddenly changed as she watched. The view abruptly zoomed right down to the platform itself, where an illustrated Sarah studied an illustrated map box. Sarah looked up. She'd been so lost in the map that the noise of the steaming, braking train hadn't penetrated her reverie. The map had interested her more than the territory. As usual, she thought, and boarded.